it's Daisy. The last episode that I did was on BPD, just kind of the reason that BPD can come out, which is trauma or abandonment in early adolescence. And I just briefly touched on in that episode one of the biggest traumas, but it didn't have to do with abandonment, so I kind of glossed over it, was my surgeries that I had as a child. But I wrote a piece recently kind of really going into detail about the history of my surgeries, which I had never written a piece about the overall kind of impact it had on me. And although it's not abandonment related, any sort of trauma in somebody who has BPD or not, anybody, has a big part to do with how we turn out as people, and it can have very large impacts on, just our mental health and our relationships with people. So I wanted to read this piece because I thought it could help people who have experienced either, trauma having to do with surgeries or hospitals or any sort of abuse of any kind, could hear my piece and maybe not feel like, oh, I'm not the only one who has these feelings or has had these reactions or turnouts to what happened, So, anyway, I'm going to read it. It's called Child. Okay. By the time I was 10 years old, I had had 8 surgeries on my left inner thigh, my groin. They started when I was less than a year old. Sometimes I had 2 surgeries in 1 year, but for the most part, I was averaging 1 a year. It was just something that happened. I was born into it. For my first 10 years, I didn't know a life without my annual children's hospital vacation. What I was born with is called a giant nevi. Simply put, it's precancerous skin. Because the surgery started before my first memory could be formed, I couldn't have them explained to me until I was around 6. I vaguely remember when Dr. Bartlett told me what it meant. Basically, Daisy, we have to get all of the nevi off of your leg before you reach puberty. I remember my stomach doing a somersault, embarrassed. That's because when that happens, the chemistry in your body will change. He had paused only a moment, most likely hoping I would get it, but I made him continue, which could potentially cause the skin to become cancerous. And that was that. What else was there to know? I was born with something that needed to be fixed, and they were fixing it. I was never worried. I was never told I had to be worried because I didn't need to be. I don't remember most of my surgeries because I was so young. I definitely remember the last few, but before that, all I remember of it growing up was from the summertime. I only wore swimming trunks. Why? Well, because my giant nevi definitely breached the average bikini line, and it was gross. It looked like a coffee stain splashed across my left inner thigh, and atop that floated many moles, dozens of black ants lost in mud. It wrapped almost 360 degrees around my leg, bordering my vagina. One summer when I was around 8, there was a day I went to the beach without my trunks. Once we had found our plot on the beach, I remember watching the girls in my family shed their clothes to reveal their flawless bodies barely covered by bikinis. I started with my shirt, easy. I wouldn't worry about my flat chest until all my surgeries were over. But when it came to my bottom half, I crouched on my towel. I remember shimmying my skirt down my legs, which were pressed together airtight like a mermaid's tail. It only took a minute of watching my cousins running along the shoreline, testing the water, laughing, carefree, before I hopped up and joined. Fuck it. For the most part, I remember having fun during the day. although I was trying to not draw attention to my leg. I remember my left leg was tense the whole day. Whether I was aware of it at the time or not, I had been using that quad all day, trying to rotate the leg inward as much as I could. It was tiring. But in the middle of the day, the Richardson kids were occupied for a few hours digging a hole on the beach, a tradition of ours. It always started with myself and my cousins, Ben and Maddie, all of us being within a year of each other. But then when the other kids on the beach saw our tremendous progress, they left their families to join, and the hole always got huge. We were reaching the end of the day, and I was squatting at the bottom of the hole digging. I had begun to hit water and was too excited to look up. Suddenly, though, a boy about my age, perhaps a year younger, came over next to me and began working on the wall of the hole, expanding its width. We worked a few minutes in silent determination before he broke it. "What's that?" I whipped my head up. He was pointing at my leg, a look of disgust on his little face. "On your leg, what's that?" I don't remember what I said, but I know that within moments I was back with my adult family, my towel wrapped around my waist. Beach day was over for me. After that, it was back to my swimming trunks. I didn't lose them for good until I was halfway through high school. Even when I started having sex, the ugliness of my scar never seemed to cross my mind in that context. My mind was preoccupied with all of the other ways I was vulnerable. And surprisingly, nobody ever asked about the scar, but I would usually bring it up after we had done the deed. What I do have an issue with in regards to sex is having other people's hands there. And yes, even their mouth tends to be out of my comfort zone. Whereas most girls would be squirming in delight to have a guy return the favor, it makes me squirm in a much different way. I feel violated. I feel pain. I feel as if I'm being stabbed. And for the brief moments I will let a man indulge, I'm right back in that operating room. I am young. I am helpless. I am naked with nothing but a thin sheet covering my body, and even that will be removed once they put me to sleep. They will work for hours in that area, and there's nothing I could do about it. It was not until recently I was able to connect the two, my issues around sex and my surgeries. Even now, I don't know if I fully understand. It's hard to piece everything together when the timeline is over 22 years. So many years I was so young that I could have easily blocked out memories that could be vital to my full understanding now. But for now, all I know is this. I know that when children are in and out of hospitals growing up and in and out of surgeries, it can cause the type of PTSD that children in abusive homes have. Both are getting hurt repeatedly, and both did nothing to deserve it. And for me, because of the location of my surgeries, this trauma translates in my body as sexual. My last two surgeries were perhaps the most uncomfortable because they took the longest and left me with something much worse than a physical scar. In my second to last surgery, they put a skin expander in my leg. For the first 6 operations, they had slowly been cutting out slivers of my bad skin, and now it was time to create healthy skin to replace it with. So they basically put a deflated balloon in my 7-year-old body. And every week I went to the children's hospital, and Dr. Bartlett stuck a needle in my leg and filled the balloon with fluid. This went on several months until I had a large bubble, the awkward size and shape of an eggplant, protruding out of my inner thigh, bordering my underwear line. It hurt to sit down. I could only wear skirts, and I needed my mom's help with everything, especially showering, dressing, and going to the bathroom. And for all those months, the feeling of that bubble made me sick. My skin felt numb. It felt like when your foot falls asleep, and then when you touch it, you can feel that you're being touched, but it feels weird. You know that feeling? I hate that feeling. I couldn't wait for that balloon to be out my leg so that that feeling would go away. But when they took it out, my skin still felt the same. The doctor said it was because all of that skin had been stretched, and so my nerve endings there were now dead. That skin would never feel alive and normal again. I can't stand my left thigh being touched. It feels creepy. So when I'm intimate with somebody, I have to tell them, because there's no way they would know otherwise. If they kiss or tickle or rub that area on that leg, I feel paralyzed. I feel violated. I feel like I did all those years ago when I was a child, and there's nothing I can do about it. So, it's a long piece, but I hope that it's helpful and relatable to anybody who has any sort of trauma. And I hope that from watching it, you can maybe piece together, like I've started to, connections that there may be between the trauma you've endured and, you know, ways that you act in relationships or things that trigger you or anything. Because I think it can be very helpful if you figure those things out. Because there's a lot you can do with it once you know them. All right, well, that's all I have to share today. Daisy does it.